order at 9:40 a.m. We will go around the tables here and everyone can just do self-introductions. And then I know we have a few members that are online joining us, so we'll catch them as well. Martin Heft, Office of Policy and Management.
Ron Hilbert, Department of Agriculture.
John, do you want to start on this end and go down?
John Casertano, Casertano's Greenhouses, Cheshire, Connecticut.
Connor Bonofsky, Canterbury Tree Farm. I'm representing CNLA.
Jenny Kipsikevich, Stonehill Farm Plainfield, and American Farmland Trust.
David Beers, Connecticut State Forestry.
All Maple Breeze Farm and Westbrook Fruit Fly.
Bonnie Burr, Brookfield, Yukon Extension.
Keith Bishop, Bishop Torches, Guilford.
Mike Gilman, Shellfish Farmer, Connecticut Sea Grant, and Yukon Extension.
Fran Whalen, beef cattle farmer in Rocky Hill Hayes Farm, also a councilman out of Rocky Hill.
Johnny Manuel, Farming and Town Council, Rocky Hill.
Nick D'Addario, Selectman, Easton, Connecticut.
Bill Lee, assessor for the city of Norwich.
Thank you all. And I know online, got Chris Martin with us, Paul Larson, Ella Kennan, and I believe Kim joined us too.
Joe Orfizi's on there.
I'm sorry, I'm on an angle where I can't see all the names.
Joe
I'm sorry.
on there. I don't see Kim
Joe, Kim was supposed to come. Yeah, Kim was going to have, she had a issue this morning. She was going to try to join in line, so she may be joining us then. So I think we've got all the members then noted there. So thank you. So to start off today, just want to touch base on a couple of things before we start moving into the methodology considerations. One is just a reminder of our purpose and our charge of the work group that will lead our discussion today. And, you know, from Governor Lamont was for convening a working group to recommend alternative measures, excuse me, to improve data collection, review, evaluation processes. So those are that's our charge in a nutshell. I appreciate everyone getting in recommendations. You know, last week that you're in the spreadsheet, we do have a few extras that have came in this morning, which you don't have in your packets or anything that way. If we have time today, we'll get to those. Otherwise, we'll do those at our next meeting for that. And you will note on some of those, there's 3 categories on the spreadsheet of, I find all my notes, land, meaning our land classification, reporting, and then valuation. And then we kind of have a other group, and some of those in the other group are outside of our purview of this work group. Some talk about some tax incentives, some other things that way. More than happy to discuss those, but those won't be part of any of our recommendations because our charge is strictly on that piece of measures to improve data collection, review, and evaluation processes. We know there could be additional things, you know, with tax incentives, other types of things. We will also look, some of those could tie into any recommendations that we do. So that's why we do have them listed there, but they're kind of in the other category at the end, just so you know how we kind of split all of those out into the spreadsheet for you that way. So today's kind of goal is to review the concepts, look at which ones we want to move forward with, which ones we have some consensus with on here. And then at our next meeting is kind of develop those, elaborate on those, kind of spell those out a little more clearly as our recommendations of the work group. There's a number of them as we go through these into each individual sections that overlap. Some things, you know, maybe like, yep, there's enough interest in that. Let's move into that. But our goal today is to try to get through the whole list, see which things, you know, hold some weight, if you will, for us to be able to move forward with, and then work on expanding those recommendations into our, you know, draft report that will get presented, you know, to the public as well before we finalize everything. So that's kind of our intent of today's meeting. So we're not going to dwell deeply into everything, for the necessary particulars of it. Obviously, you can review in the spreadsheet, you'll see the person who presented it and the date. That's so I can at least look back to the paperwork if we need to find any clarification of something, if the individual's not here to explain anything for that. But that's kind of our process that we'll go through today.
Thank you, Undersecretary. 2 items. One, Keith was kind enough to put together this ranking score sheet that's over on the name tag table. So if people want to follow along where the consensus is on ranking the different approaches that have been recommended so far. But I want to acknowledge that Damon Brash has come in and we're locating his name tag. But for the purposes of attendance, it looks like he's here, even though he doesn't have a name tag. And that's all I have. Let's dig in.
Sorry, I'm having notes as we go here. So. Do we put the spreadsheet up? Either the one that's in the agenda or the one that Keith did? That thing, yeah, perfect. And I think we just have to minimize the screen a little bit there. Everybody, because that might be helpful for everyone to just kind of look at as we go through these, which follows the Excel that was in the packet. Thanks, Keith, kind of putting that together. There's some additional backup to some of them attached in the packet as well for this. And the other ones were all ones that were presented previously.
All right, just note that what I did is not an exact mirror image of what you put together, but it's consolidated, so there's not duplicates and things that are together. And there's a little bit of separation like you get down into 9, 10, 11, as far as the nuances of how you would handle some of those pieces. So as you want to rank on your own or how we go about it down the road, those things are more clearly because you could rank one of those differently than another one.
Right. No, thank you. Thank you on that. And I will apologize if there's anything in the spreadsheet that I had put together, anything. If I misinterpreted something, please let me know. Because I tried to go back through all the notes, everything that got sent in, tried to, obviously not put big paragraphs in, but get the concept down of what we wanted to do in there. So if I misinterpreted something, please just shout out when we get to it so we can correct it on there, and we'll kind of follow through here. And I appreciate that, Keith, because there are a number of things when you look at it. If we talk here on the land classification, a number of people put simplify land classification, in it, and I didn't delve into the specifics as much on the spreadsheet. I think it's a little bit more, in here. So the first category, the first 5 here, that we look at, we go through with varying ones of simplify, reduce the land classification to, 5-class or less model or, tiered type approach. Was definitely discussion about removing the River Valley and just having it statewide land assessment. So we don't have the statewide and River Valley. Implement a single flat statewide farmland classification and value. The value piece we're going to cover later, just so you know, we've got to keep things separate. So, but looking at a single flat statewide farmland classification. Maintain forest land valuation. Okay, that doesn't belong there. That's valuation under number 4 on that chart there. So I've got to pull that down to valuation.
Yeah, that is one that I edited in. So
that's a valuation item. So just so you'll know, we're not going to hit that on this piece.
I think what we could do is,
4 and 5 are both
as a separate category.
That's the only things relating to forest land. Since they weren't on the list before, I decided need to at least have it on the list somehow.
Yeah, but I do want to talk. I mean, it's fine talking about having the classification of forest land in this piece here, but the valuation piece, we're going to pop those down into the valuation to keep our categories there. But I think that covers the ones that were submitted in, to us. And I just want to some of the things, that we had talked about just as kind of a piece here. We had talked about, prime farmland. We had talked about farmyard, as well as some other types pieces as we've talked here. But want to kind of have discussion. It kind of lumps together there of, reducing, the number of classes that we have, as well as looking at the statewide and removing just the River Valley piece there. So want to take people's thoughts on those kind of two concepts that we have here. Let's take the, do we remove the River Valley and just have one state? What's people's thoughts on that? Ellen? Or Jenny, I'm sorry.
Not a problem at all. Jenny Kipsikevich. Before we get into that, I actually have a question, an overarching question. Do we have a way to know which items would require either a legislative change, or because that does, impact decision-making in terms of ease of implementation or difficulty for adoption? So do we have a way to know that as we're working through this right now?
I can tell you that currently there is no legislation for how we value this.
Okay.
So in one, there isn't any legislation now. So some of it could be that, one of our recommendations be, we want to implement legislation to set the way we value it, everything. So currently there is no, it's up to OPM and DOAG to set the process on it here. So nothing in sense requires any legislative change because there isn't anything in legislation currently. So we're kind of, it's open at that point. Hopefully that helps on that. But I think, if we get through, I know some of the recommendations where it talks about, you get into evaluation, setting a statewide mill rate, those things, those would require legislation. And I can hit those as we get to those pieces of it. Does that help? Okay.
So, thank you.
Just state your name for everybody, just
getting there.
reminder. Thanks, Damon.
Damon Brush. I think one of the things within that category is that the approach that is being used for a reason. There was research, there was a thought process that was already put in place, and there is a difference in the valuation, not only because of the crop yield, but because of the use of River Valley as opposed to tillable D, the rest of the state. And I have some information I would love to share, which basically gives you a land map based on soil types. And you can clearly see that there's a difference. The assessor's handbook references tillable A, B, C based on soil type. Okay? Soil types, we can get soil maps and we can actually associate what tillable A would be, and we can do it as a broad-based category. So I think if you don't mind, I could share some of that information. I think that the categories are useful, and I do think that there is a distinct difference in valuation between river and mountain. Farmington land is not worth the same as Glastonbury land. So I have two parts in these notes. Well, the other part is towards valuation, but they're all together. So I think if we could just better associate what a tillable A is to, say, Hartford Sandy Loam, or something along the actual soil type classifications, this would solve the problem. There is no confusion. You can see it on a map. You can also use that information for pulling income information at some later point, because again, this is on the basis that this is nice, flat, low rock, tillable land. High yield stuff. It's the good part. It's from the floodplain out from the river. It's not like the land, like I said, out in Torrington, out in Ashford, or some of the other what's known as woodland areas. can kind of look, if you look at the map portion, the orange part right down the middle, that's the Connecticut River Valley. Actually, the part that's defined for us as River Valley is actually only the upper half of that, from about Rocky Hill, even as far as Portland, that area going north. The pink areas and the orange areas are pretty much what you would define as tillable A and River Valley. And as you get out into the greens and the blues, again, you could get it's a soil type, but it's not going to be the same type. So you may have, tillable A in a non-river valley, but you are definitely different.
Rather than, I don't want to, as I said, I want to delve too deeply into everything and analyze everything. What we're looking for is, do we move forward with this concept of eliminating or not? Or we can decide, no, we need some more information on it. So we kind of look at where we're going on the recommendations. So we're kind of looking, is there a consensus to drop to just statewide? Is there a consensus to leave as is? Or is there consensus that we need more information, such as what Damon's presenting to us here, to make a determination, and that we can obviously schedule those meetings and whatever else is follow-up here, more moving forward. And I only say that, because if we don't want to delve into every single one of these recommendations, we will never get through a process here, to go through. We're trying to come up with, the concepts itself, and then we can explore deeper into those concepts, because we've had a review of these. We've talked about everything that we're going to be talking about here today. So we're just looking about, kind of setting, on this, as a ranking. Is this low? Is it high? Do we move forward? Everything else.
Well, I think
Yeah. 1 second, because I know Joe online.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for, can you hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up.
Yes.
Okay. I sent a document to a couple folks on this. I really like the idea of reducing the categories. I agree with Damon that, there's different categories and there's different values to them, but I really like the idea of reducing them. And one of the things that landed on me last meeting was, what if we just used statewide importance, non-statewide important soils, and prime ag soils? Those are already categories that are available. I agree with Damon, like having them available on a map. We don't need to compute them. They're already available. I don't see a reason necessarily to pull out the River Valley as a separate area. I agree those are more fertile soils. They're typically flatter. There's not as many rocks, but you can get pretty good farmland on the drumlins of the hills of Connecticut, and that's often prime or it's statewide importance soil. And so it would be a simpler way. And the other reason I like that is it reminds the towns that these are important farmland soils. So you could say tillable A, tillable B, and that kind of implies that somebody's tilling them. There's some confusion, even just the terminology there. Whereas statewide importance soils, prime ag soils, those remind towns who aren't familiar always with farming that, hey, these soils are important and they are farmable soils, and they should be, or they're acceptable to be farmed. So I like those categories. The other thing that I'm cautious about with having a lot of different categories is the farmland's not necessarily all that different between some of these categories. What somebody's doing on tillable B may not be all that different from tillable A. And so, and then the tax implication of somebody in a river valley, how much more are they actually paying in taxes? Is it worth having a whole bunch of different categories for maybe just $100 a year or so of extra tax? Maybe not even, maybe $10 a year if you have tillable A versus tillable B, or river valley versus hills. So I think categories are good, classifications are good, but I would be a fan of maybe 3 of them, and maybe like non-prime, prime soils, statewide important soils. And then I also would be interested in chatting more about a farmyard category for where the buildings and greenhouses and things like that, the land that those fall on. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Joe. Fran and then Keith.
Fran Whalen, I agree with reducing the number of classifications. And I'm also a farmer in the River Valley of Weathersfield and Rocky Hill. Yes, the soils are great soils, but with this weather we're having, it's so unpredictable. Probably in the last 5 years, we've lost 3 years of crops down there with the rain, the flooding, the moisture levels, and the disease that comes in related to that. So, I mean, yes, they are better soils in other parts of the state, but we're not getting the use of that crop many times over and over, we're finding out. So I'd be in favor of taking out that River Valley category and just have a statewide category.
Yep, Keith Bishop. I concur as far as the soil maps and the importance of what that is when it's used that way and available. Availability is one thing that Fran just referred to. I like to go back to what is our goal. And I see one of the goals is to preserve our land and to have it remain open and available for farming. And to that end of it is a significant difference between the quality of the land, a big factor. We want to preserve all the land, whether you can put a greenhouse on something that's on the hillside pasture in Whitfield County or other place that's difficult to actually put a plow into. But does the exact quality and location of that land mean that we should have a different category for that and subdivide the stuff out that then is, $10 bill difference in what the taxes is, as opposed to having more consolidated measure, whether it's one flat or whether it's, several down from the 8 that we currently have. So I would argue that direction and not have the soil mapping be indication. Thank you.
Damon?
David Brosh, just a quick follow-up. I think, again, as they were originally laid out, there was a difference. And really, you got to kind of look at it in terms of price point, right? Because there is a difference in value between different types of land. And so I think they're trying to recognize, they must have obviously seen a value difference between, the use and in-use value between those two different categories. If you look at this recent survey information, they're actually a lot closer. So in some degree, that does support that there isn't that much of a valuation difference, because really what you're looking for different price points. And I think the price points, when you look at trying to determine a value for this, is really going to separate what you have as far as land classifications. And it's easy to tie that to a soil type, in some way or another, but you have to come up with some point of separation, because I think you're going to either overvalue people or you're going to undervalue people if you don't have some segments. You're going to be valuing the same non-tillable rocky ledge at the same rate as, flat soil. So I think there is a difference there, and it should be determined by price point as well.
Bonnie?
Bonnie Burke. I'm really intrigued by what Joe said regarding how we look at prime and important versus those that are not. Land right now is super competitive. And Fran, I'm going to, come back and totally agree with you that for those that are down in the River Valley, they're always watching to see what's going to happen with any flooding and things like that. So when this was originally laid out, from my understanding, that valley was all about tobacco. And guess what? It's not about tobacco anymore. And so it does become really competitive when people are looking to try to get land. And when I'm in South Windsor or going up the river, you're seeing people planting corn out there. They're planting vegetables. There's nowhere near as much tobacco as there used to be. So it's while it's a prime land, I'm not sure that delineating it because it's close to the river valley is really where we want to go. And again, I would just really echo that I like the idea of making it more easier to understand when we look at what's prime soils versus not. and totally agree with you, David, that there is a big difference between what's tillable and what's really rocky, and all we're growing up there are stone walls. So I think that we do need to address the differences, but I think taking away the designation of the Connecticut River Valley may be helpful for this process.
Yeah, Ben Freund. I'm going to jump on Keith's bandwagon here. I think that a lot of this can be handled simply through getting accurate rental information, and I'd like to see like the classifications. And this becomes immaterial because if you're getting the value back in the land, you're getting back in the land.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, I think one of the thoughts that's been going through my head through this whole process is, you could have two very similar pieces, parcels of land, perhaps even very similar or the same soil types, but they're being utilized very differently by different farmers. And so to come up with a valuation, evaluation of that land based on what is being produced on any given operation is really not. I mean, that can be very misleading. One farmer. I don't want to penalize one farmer because he's being really productive and raising a lot of high value crops on his 10-acre parcel, and another farmer is not utilizing that land in the same way, but is being assessed at a higher value as if he was. So I don't know, somehow I guess there's some challenges there in trying to determine the value based on, I think it needs to be the potential of that land. That would certainly make sense, but not the actual production.
Joe?
Yeah, I just to Paul's point there, I think I'm with him on that challenge, and that's why I was thinking in that doc I'd sent in April, I was thinking you could incentivize certain practices that we might want to see related to maybe ecosystem services in the state. And I realize that's kind of a triggering word in cases, but you want to see more perennial grazing. You give an incentive for grazing, which doesn't make as much money as tillage crops, right? Or you give an incentive for perennial orchards. I think that's helpful. I think when we get into some of this tillable, high valley, river valley considerations, to Paul's point, what if you have a farmer who one year is growing corn and the next year is pasturing it for 3 or 4 years, and then they're going to grow corn or alfalfa? You also have these dynamics where people aren't growing hopefully they aren't growing the same crop year after year after year for decades and decades, because that's going to have soil implications. And so, a farmer may not even be doing the same thing. And yeah, and also those statewide importance prime soils, those are based on the soil quality, right? Those are based on the soil type. So that's still gets back to that original way that Connecticut did this, and a lot of other states did it. I'll stop there.
Thanks.
I'll just share that when we do our farmland preservation ranking and scoring criteria, it's based on the soil type. So we do have those maps. Those maps are readily available on a digital platform. So there is some ease to get there. I just want to kind of pull this together because we've got
Is it based on tillable, Brian? Sorry, is it based on tillable, like tillable A, tillable B, or is it based on prime statewide?
Prime soils, state and local, important soils, and then non-prime.
Yeah. Thanks.
So similar to what you had mentioned previously, Joe. I'd like to pull together, is there an interest in a river valley and a non-river valley classification, or is there consensus to move to one statewide classifications to be determined after further explanation?
I'm in favor of verifying that such a point differential is necessary. Once we're able to gather and determine market value, I think we should then consider, is there a dramatic market value difference between those two segments? Again, just like any other land tier, and make that decision. Right now, it doesn't look like there is, in which case there is no need to have the separate category. But I think that we can't just disregard the fact and look at it.
Yeah, I don't know where we would find that differentiating data.
That comes from the next part of the whole process, which is refining the gathering of data and such. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think we also have to remember that some of these pieces, will also depend upon some of the other things. They all piggyback together here. So I know it's kind of hard to talk one piece when we don't know how this next step is going to happen or what this other piece is going to be. But it's also why we've got to look at kind of each thing separately, as well. And then it's going to be tying these together depending upon them. If there are going to be recommendations that don't match up, or we may say we get to reporting, we're going to be like, well, until we know the valuation process, we may not know how it's going to get reported or types of things that way. That's why we're just really trying to look and try to remember concepts here that we need to explore and expand after this. So we're just trying to get the basics down first so we know what to move forward with. Don't get into all the logistics at this point, because we'll never get done and figure out, what way we need to move. It's good to have the conversation here, knowing, yes, we have to figure out these differences and everything else, to do that. So it sounds of it, yes, it's worth exploring, removing, the state and the river, and removing the river from the conversations we're hearing. That's kind of where we're trying to get to.
So just quickly, I don't want to have us get stuck in the mud, no pun intended, into the soil and all that sort of stuff. But from the standpoint of, if we go down this slowly, as you just indicated, Martin, here, we're going to spend an awful lot of time trying to evaluate sections that really have intertwining. And that chart that I created, which can be refined by other people smarter to put together, if we then use that for a vote or tally between now and the next meeting, then we can come up with some rankings that then don't take as much discussion, but we can individually think about it. That's one reason why I put that together as a suggestion for that direction. And just rhetorically wise, if you're valuing something at $1,000 an acre, typically the tax is going to be 25 to $30 an acre. $3,000 is 75 to $100 an acre across the town. How much differential is going to make a decision on an individual farmer, whether what they're doing on that land for that differential? And I don't think we're going, $5,000 to $10,000 an acre, to then really have a extreme valuation here. I think that's going to send our committee a whole different direction, like got created back in December or January. So that's my point. I think we need to move on and look at a ranking that we individually can put together for the next meeting.
John and then Ben.
John Emanuel. Yeah, I just want to kind of piggyback off of what Keith was saying, because I have the similar sentiments. I think if we keep it at 30,000 feet right now, and if we have a consensus or by vote or whatever, to first, do we want to remove River Valley or not? Do we want to reduce the classifications, the tillables, yes or no? At least if we keep those high level things, like the decision, then we can start going down the rabbit holes later.
Ben Friday, I just want to congratulate the commissioner on that incredibly difficult that you presented. Or this gentleman over here, and just say, let's do yes or no votes if you want to try to move things.
I'll second that.
Nate, you want to put the spreadsheet back up on the screen, please?
Everybody see that?
Okay, so let's do, first we were talking about here was number 2 on there, actually, reduce land classifications by removing the River Valley. Those that are in favor of it want to in the room, raise their hands, and then we'll go online. Or if you want to click the raise hand feature online, and Nate, I don't know if you can pull that up a little bit so I can see who's online on it. That way we be able to maybe do this without having to do a roll call. Try to keep it simple as if we can.
I have to switch back and forth.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to make sure everyone has a chance. There we go. Okay. Yeah. So if those members online can, either when we do a yes, no vote here, can use the raise hand feature and let us know. Those in favor that we add on to the recommendation, reduce land classifications by removing River Valley, raise your hands. Okay, opposed? Okay, so that carries. Add that on to list. Obviously, these are recommendations. These are just things to move forward with. Okay, so then we're looking at reducing the land classifications, down to, lesser model. We've had some discussion with this here already, looking at prime, non-prime, state, local, or farmland is all the various categories. So we'll ask if there's those that are in favor to simplify and reduce the land classifications to raise your hands. Okay, and those not in favor of that? And that carries on that. Okay, thank you for that. I'm not sure where the single flat statewide farmland classification came in because I didn't have it. Keith, do you know where that part of
That was part of various recommendations. So I would say that let's move on beyond that.
Yeah.
That's getting into the weeds.
Valuation piece? That's what okay. Just wanted to make sure I'm not missing something. Okay, so let's move on to reporting. And some of these I want to go through because just so we know where some of the bases came up from here. Some of these talk about, I know, report you have up there shows 2 on there, and we've got, a few more of these are condensed a little bit. But just to give a background, there was a discussion about utilizing Department of Revenue Services sales and use tax exemptions and require mandatory reporting of PA 490 acreage, using the M29 farmland to close the circle and require all lease and rental agreements, mandatory annual reporting of rental rates using the M28 forms, and require the rental information at the time of PA 490 application. And also talking about an annual farm reporting in a central database as well, for that. That's one of the things where, if you collect the lease, information or the rental information at the time of application, they don't reapply again. So there's kind of a, slight problem there. You're going to have it at one point, but if it's in PA 490 for 20 years, you're never going to get any updates and anything. So I think some of that needs to get, looked at there where it's a good starting point, but it doesn't give us things to move forward as well. So I think, what that kind of ties into matching up with some of the annual reporting. So I know the condensed
on that part, I think if you file an M29 or file for 490, recognizing that classification will hold for your tenure on that land. My assumption, and I'm looking at Keith and Ben, because I think you guys brought this up, is that you would have to, in addition to on an annual basis, come in and report to town hall, so that it wasn't just at the time of application, but it was an additional requirement on the farmer.
Yeah, so the intention there is simply not to prescribe how it would be carried out, but what, you're administrators that are good at this. This is a touch point. Collect it then. If you're going to make it a 3-year requirement, right now for buildings, it's every year. So you can do something like that, or go at a logical interval.
But in addition to just applying for 490.
Right. That's insufficient. You can't just, it's like ours has been 50 years.
Right.
Jenny Kipsikevich, there's a lot to unpack in what you just said, and I think that it would be gross negligence to just, kind of just brush it off, because this is one of the primary purposes, as I understand it from our governor, of this group. And so we literally just had one statement that got made about everything getting lumped into this one pot. And so I personally feel, as a member who has sat here and listened to all the information over the last several months, this feels like something we should at some point be diving deeper about how we are going to actually do this work, because that's what I think we all recognize had an error occur, whatever we want to deem as what went wrong. So this is the area I feel that we really need to invest some time, is about how we actually collected the data, how we're going to collect the data in the future. So I want to make sure that we use caution about this, like, one item essentially.
Correct. Yeah, there's a couple of things in here, that's why I say there was, got shortened down. That's why I wanted to read through the ones on the other full report here. And some of this, this is where I go back to earlier where I said, all these things intertwine, because we're not, until we figure out what the valuation is going to be, how it's going to be done, what reporting is required. And so, they kind of go hand in hand. If we're using current process, we can look at it in that sense and say, okay, well, how do we do the reporting to get the current data within the current process we're using? But if we make a recommendation to do valuation a different way, well, that's going to change what reporting we need. So we're going to have to flip back. So, there may not be a clear, concise piece on the reporting piece, on this.
Right. And there's the unique nuance that we're talking about land use, and that's as the current law states that this is a land use kind of activity that's associated with a land owner, which isn't always the farmer, right? So there's the complexity there about how to gather that.
I think and fair point to Jenny, I think the question is, do we want to explore further additional mandated reporting by the farmer to the town hall at some regular interval? I think is the question to discuss, not whether or not, or I guess, or do we not want an additional reporting requirement on the farmer? That's what these three categories break down into. Which doesn't change the valuation or potential surveys or anything else. This would be a new component into the system.
Damon? Thank you, Damon Brush. Just a couple of points. Currently, right now, when you classify the property as farmland, you're done. 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, it doesn't matter. You never have to reapply. The only thing you apply for on an annual basis would be your farm exemption for machinery and equipment or things like that related to personal property. But your classification is done, and it stays there according to law until one of two things happens, either a change of use or a change of ownership. So that would require a legislative change, because it says so that right now, once the application is in, it's done. And if you're now saying in order to maintain your classification, you have to file annual paperwork, that would require some type of a change. It would also aggravate a lot of farmers because right now farmers are used to, I don't have to keep filing stuff. And if we now keep polling them for this information, I'm sure the assessor's office will receive the back end of that. And it will eventually go back up to the governor's office as well. So I just think that I understand the want to get the information, but annual polling of every farmer through the assessor's office or things of that nature, I would personally recommend against. I think it creates a burden, and I don't know how much more you could get. I do want to follow up, though, with a question to Martin and to Brian. I took note searching the web for information and found your 2022 census data on agricultural information on the DOAG site. A lot of information there. You could I just bulked it and took the average and used the rates that were in the reports and came up with an average valuation of $13,000 an acre. I don't know what any of those farms were, whatever product they produced, but based on the lump sum averages between 5,000 farms and 700 and some odd thousand acres. The question is, right now, within those forms that you get for the exemptions and whatnot there's information as far as what is the product that you use and what kind of stuff. What is the degree of data that you have associated with these incomes?
Yeah, great question. I want to correct your statement, Damon. It's not our data. It's the USDA National Ag Statistics Survey data. So we make it available. And so that was part of the conversation we had one of our previous meetings, that NASS is already doing land valuation surveys directly to farmers. I don't know how they get their list. That's not shared with us, but they do that already. And so, part of what we might want to consider during this process is, do we move from a Connecticut-based data collection system and rely on NASS? And we have, and there's concern out there that what happens if NASS discontinues a survey. They have done that to us. We have paid for them to continue that survey. So there is an opportunity for us to maintain that data collection, given that they have, they have a list, they have all the statisticians, they have a lot of the components that don't exist within OPM or DOAG, which is one of the reasons why we use the Zwick Center.
Well, wouldn't Department of Revenue have some type of listing of those farms? Tax returns. I mean, they're filing the exemptions and they're adding data to that form.
We can't have that data though. So DRS does have, if an individual filed, they would have that data, but we do not have access to that data.
Just curious.
Yep. Good one. Joe's been waiting up there.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I'm a little cautious on the National Agricultural Statistics Service data. I've used those data in research before, and they're good. And anybody who files a Schedule F typically will get a request. But like revenues from those are probably gross revenue, not net revenue. So I'd just be thoughtful about that. In terms of this rental or this reporting dynamic, there's kind of two things. One feels like a cart before the horse on it. Another one feels like something that is maybe has to be legislated or not, but is worth discussing, which is okay. So there's the dynamic of farms reporting more annually to get better information about how much they're making or how much rental agreements costs and all of that. And I think that we would need to figure out once we figure out what our valuation method is and then how we obtain the data to meet a valuation method. So I don't think we're quite there yet. I do think there is this dynamic that's worth discussing. Maybe it's not something we can decide on, of situations where, somebody leases farmland or allows a farmer to farm their land, and how do they show that that's actually actively farmed land? And I in that sense, I am a fan of using the state sales tax exemption dynamic for that, which would raise the bar quite a bit from $2,500 an acre to whatever you need for the sales tax, which is like 10 grand of, I don't know, cost or not. And that certainly is a form that I'd much rather provide to my town than like a federal tax form. And so, and then whether somebody stays in it or not, I mean, I think there is a dynamic where a town right now could challenge somebody and say, hey, you're not actively farming that land anymore. Please prove that you are. I mean, I think they could make that challenge. An assessor could if they would like to, as opposed to us trying to suggest that we have mandated reporting every year and then needing to legislate that. But I do want to separate those things out. Are we talking about reporting from the sense of collecting data for evaluation method, which perhaps, but I would think that's a later conversation. And then are we talking about reporting for somebody to qualify as farming to meet the eligibility of getting into 490 as farmland? Also, we kind of skipped through forest land. I'm not a big, I kind of like the way forest land has been working, but we kind of skipped through that on the first part in the categories. I'll stop.
Ben Freund. So I kind of have to push back a little bit on calculating burden. I don't think that it's a particular burden to work with things, especially if it's reported on a regular basis. It's something that we're used to doing. It's not a reason not to do a particular valuation or and in terms of the valuation, I think that our current methods with good data work time well. So that's why I think that getting enough data is the crux of what we need to do in this 490 to work well. And so that's why mandate it at the assessor level, get good data, that's what you follow.
Just what are you asking be reported? I think that's
The rental
the
amount.
actual rental amount.
Yeah, what's asked for on that survey that failed, it caused the whole system to crash. Start there and get good information at that level. Has worked, has a good history of work.
Damon, then Bonnie.
I didn't catch, sorry, Bonnie. So just a quick point, and I didn't want to poo-poo the reporting aspect because I just didn't want to tie it to the removal of classification. That's a separate issue. However, currently, assessors' offices generally poll all income producing properties of their annual income and expenses, income and expense report. So if I have a shopping plaza, I am asked to report what my income from rental was and what my expenses associated with the property was. That has failed to be filed. You are penalized 10% of the property assessment. So property at 100,000 is now taxed at 110. You could do the same thing with farmland. You could require an annual report detailing income and expenses for that. They fail to file, you could apply a penalty. Talking about a farmland assessment of $1,000 an acre, it's not a significant amount, but it may get their attention and you may get a better required filing. That's why the penalties are there, is to inspire those to do so. So possible suggestion associated with what's currently in play that would require legislative change because it pretty much requires it to be an income producing property. You could state that these are indeed supposed to be income producing properties, or at least produce producing property.
That noted, that would be an item that would need to go through legislation to change a reporting requirement and all of that type of stuff, just as a point to keep those, done that way.
I would say just being Bonnie Bird, I would just say being built on what's been said here in the last couple of minutes. Every year farmers, it's strongly urged anybody that is farming land goes to their local farm service agency office and they report their acreage. And in reporting their acreage, they also have to tell you what they're planting on that acreage. The farm owner doesn't do that unless he is a farmer and producer. It's the land renter, the person using that land that goes in. But here's the crux. You cannot get that information from NASS or from FSA. They will aggregate data, which Damien, I think is what you're seeing.
Yeah.
They will not ever turn over to commissioner. Here is what Bonnie Bird planted on this farm this year. And I'm guaranteed they would not turn that over to tax assessors. So it's up to the farmer that is using that land who can ask for a printout from USDA to take that land to show what they are doing on a per acre basis or per half acre basis. The question is, what is the burden of saying to a farmer, okay, Mr. Bishop, you're going into FSA to report your acreage this year. Now you have to turn around and go one step further, print off, let me have my farm reports. And then I'm going to go down to the tax assessor and show and prove that, yes, in fact, I have certified to USDA that this is the amount of acreage I used on my farm that I rent or own, and then go forward. The question is, what's the burden you want to put on every farmer every year to show that, in fact, they have reported their acreage? But I think that the challenge is trying to get that, and we saw it with the disaster program. It was something commissioner had to go forward and try to get everybody to say, what did you turn into USDA, for acreage losses and flooding losses? So there's obviously a communication breakdown between what USDA will provide versus making the farmer take that next step to show, here's what I produced on this tract of land. And they're very detailed maps. If anybody ever wants to see a USDA map, they're all digitized. You can go in and these guys can go in and get it anytime. But I think the question is, what's the burden that needs to be proven, on a regular basis? What's that regular time that they should be taking those maps into their tax assessor?
John?
Then I'll go to Ella.
Fran Whalen. Is the M28 and M29, are those legislative form for the Department Act? Yeah. So if we were to do this, it would have to be another form to get the rentals from the farmers. I think it's going to be extreme aggravation the first year. Well, farmer would have to identify where that parcel of property is, the address, how much acreage and all that. I think after that, it's going to be repetitive. It's not going to be so bad. That's something we have to consider. And I would think if it was to be done, I would encourage assessors to send that form out yearly to remind the farmer. I know it's the farmer's obligation to do, and would be by the legislative process, but especially during the first few years, being that this, if it's implemented, this is a new process, so that the farmers are aware. You know, if it happens.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think reporting is that onerous. I think we do annual reporting anyway. For farm building exemptions, equipment exemptions. I don't find that onerous, and I would be one of them. I also really, the income-based thing, if our charge is to preserve farmland, I think that disincentivizes people to be productive farmers. And look, farmers want to put their kids through college just like everyone else. But if you're disincentivized to do that, I think we're going to have the opposite effect. And farming is very different than running a shopping center. So I have a real problem with that one. I also believe that most people don't, even large scale farmers have their land typically in an entity separate from their personal property or maybe even their company property. And so everybody leases land to some degree. And I think that's an easy number to report, because even if we're leasing it from ourselves, we're coming up with a number that's sustainable for our operations. And that seems like a reasonable number.
Ella?
Gosh, there's been a lot of points made since I last raised my hand, so I'll try my best. To Damon's points about not disincentivizing income, I agree. I don't think that income should be part of it. To Damon's other point, oh, what was your last point?
Who are you asking, Ella?
Damon, what was your last point?
What Ella's asking you? Good question.
It was about income and expense reports and saying
Right,
we can do
there's-
the same thing about for farmland, but require legislative change was the last piece he discussed.
I thought there was something right after that. Or who spoke last? Maybe I'm thinking it was Damon who spoke last, but I can't
John
actually see.
talked
John.
about annual reporting's already done, but discussed about, the income basis and
Oh, right. Yeah. So that's what I was going to say. I mean, that's not taking into account the fact that 40% of transactions are cashless, and that's not a Connecticut phenomenon, right? Like that's a nationwide phenomenon. A lot of so-called leases are no cash leases, right? So you'd have to figure that out. To Bonnie's point about FSA, it would be ideal if every farmer had an FSA number and every farmer filled out a crop plan and every farmer filled out a Schedule F, but that is not true. And I don't think it's within the purview of this group to change farmers' behavior in that particular way. So just want to sort of like highlight the fact that that is missing out on a lot of farmers and their behavior.
Thanks, Jenny. Then Joe.
Jenny Kipsikevich, please forgive me, folks. I'm going to go back to the original statute. As I understand, PA 490 is about the land's use, that agriculture is being performed on the land. We sit in this room representing businesses that are farms, right? But that doesn't have to be the case, right? You could have a hobby farmer, and I'm using that, please I'm putting that very much in quotes. You could have just a person who wants to go out and buy 30 acres to just grow food for their own family. They are keeping that land's use as agriculture, but they might not be filing on their income tax any kind of money because they're not selling a product. Yet that land, in my definition, according to PA 490, is in fact in agricultural use. It's just not producing food for sale. So I guess I just want to remind the group that the current law, as I see it or read it, is about the use of the land, not necessarily tied to the income of the land. So I just feel it's a point that we need to keep revisiting.
Point though.
Thanks. Hold on.
Consideration.
Line up. So just wait your turn. Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, thanks. Jenny, that point's well taken. I will change what I say about one of my notes right now. But one thing I want to point out is this federal FSA dynamic and trying to go off of federal reporting. Not all farmers work with the federal government, and so I think if we try to use that as some way of somebody proving that they're farming or gathering farm income data, I don't think we're doing a service to those people who don't work with the federal government for whatever reasons they choose. I realize some folks in the group don't see paperwork as a burden, but I do. I think the amount of paperwork we have to fill out is burdensome. That's not why a lot of people farm, and I would be really remiss to require farmers to do more paperwork. I think we should look at existing paperwork if we're going to say, how do you prove you're a farm? I think we look at what people already have, and there's a huge incentive to get the state sales tax exemption by many farmers in the state, and that's a form we have. We are used to presenting to people, including the cashier at Tractor Supply, or our taxes to be share a whole bunch of private data for business. We should have with the state give us the form. We have the form present, and actually I may be too high of a bar as it relates to these prior points. The other thing I want to point out, not common as I think we assume, and I think if we're trying to use rental values to value 490, we might end up back in this situation because we don't really know how many people are renting land, and we don't have a good way of valuing it. That's what caused this problem to begin with. And I think about where I farm in northeastern Connecticut, and I couldn't find somebody to rent land. There is incredibly few parcels of land that are rented. And remember, parcels that are rented are typically rented by the parcel, not by the soil type or the land classification. So that was the whole challenge we ran into with swampland. So I think using rental for valuations is a very messy process, and not all farmers will lease land to themselves either.
Stick on the reporting piece, Joe? I don't
Yeah,
want to get into I want to stick on the reporting piece.
Well, the reporting of rentals, right? Like, anyway, I'll stop. I know others gotta go. Yep.
Okay, Damon?
No, I was just simply going to comment that I understand that they could have non-income producing farms, but part of the requirement for the assessor to consider is the income. That is one of the categories that they do want to look at as a productive farm.
John Emanuel. I wanted to go back to the reporting part because a lot of what we're talking about is, again, going down some of the details. But if we solidify the process of if we look back at what really went wrong, and it was contacts, lack of, we had to go back 5 years, 10 years, and try and find email addresses, things like that. If we solidify how the template is created and distributed, I think we can start having conversations offshoot of that. So Fran and I had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with our assessor, and to discuss 490, some of the frustrations and things like that. And he said he had reached out to DOAG if they needed any help with valuations and things like that. So it was our recommendation that DOAG and OPM create a template, lock the template, and if the two parties want to work with UConn, just to lock the template structure, send it out to all the local assessors, And that's the baseline for the structure of communication. So the local assessors can work with their local farmers and know the business and update the template accordingly. So when DOAG needs to do the valuations, all the local assessors just send it to DOAG with all the updated information. If it's whether we're going to still continue with the survey or a general communication to everybody, it's up to the local assessor to keep that information updated. And if we want to tack on additional data like land classification versus just total acreage or whatever, to get down to the weeds to that level, then it's the local assessor being able to obtain that data and send it to DOAG. But I think we need to solidify that process.
Others, did I miss anybody? Sorry, I was trying to keep up with that.
Keith, really briefly, I mean, in terms of what data is out there, what we legally can get, when and where. There's a, we can get from DRS, what is the number of farm tax exemptions that they have that they've issued? You know, no names, but you know, as much information as they can give. What's that number compared to how many people fill out the form that Damon's the M29 that has the farm piece and they're signing that they get a farm exemption? What's that differential? And then go back and say, what are we trying to save? And back to Ella's point, we're trying to save land. And I agree that I've got a problem with fallow land just hanging out and somebody having, you know, a gigantic, you know, estate that doesn't do much productivity. But on the other hand, it's still remaining open. So how do you have a differential? And that's another deeper piece. So my point is just what data is out there? How much differential is there to say there's only 3,029 signed forms, but there's 10,000 farm tax exemptions? Well, why is that? And then are the other 7,500 or whatever it is really legitimate to be getting that level of support? That's another whole legislative.
So just to wrap this one up before we move on, the evaluation. What's the consensus of the group to create an additional mandating requirement to town hall? The details will be explored at the next meeting. But is this an avenue, data collection, the group sees as viable, or is it something that you don't want to continue a conversation on?
Got that?
Aren't we cart before the horse here? I feel like, how can we talk about reporting if we don't know what valuation methods we should be using?
You can't value without reporting. Sorry.
No, I understand that, but if we don't know what valuation methods we're, and if the basic question is, are we asking farmers to do more reporting? I'm happy to vote on that.
I think that those are the recommendations in the group, and I think that is the question.
Right.
You state the question that we're.
Would people like to explore creating a mandated reporting portal through the town on some regular cadence or not? So the general, yes, if you would like that.
No. Sorry, just to clarify, is that for collecting data or is that for staying in farmland as part of PA 490?
That'd be for collecting data. The PA 490 is the one-time filing, as Damon mentioned. This would be
Okay,
for
so collecting data.
for evaluation purposes.
For compiling statistics about what agriculture really is about in active. Another way of phrasing that.
Sure. Sorry, I didn't catch anybody online.
Yeah, no. Can we just raise our hands again if you're in favor for that so we can get a good count? Okay. Against? What? 9-4. 5, sorry. do we want to, one of the things that was on the data piece, one of the other things that was kind of talked about was more of an annual reporting, with the PA 490 process. We want to look at anything further with that, as kind of more of an annual report, separate from data collection, everything. One of the other recommendations was to have some sort of annual reporting to kind of keep your PA 490 up, in that status there. Sorry. Oh, eligible. Thank you. I knew there was a word. You kind of your eligibility status of PA 490. That was kind of the other piece there. So we want to look at, do we create an annual eligibility report or recommendation rather, for PA 490, which case obviously that could include data, whatever else as well on it that way, but making an annual report rather than just the normal survey. So question on that?
Opinion?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think that the eligibility for 490 is well established and that works well. I don't know why we want to do that at this point. Separate issue.
Right. That's fine. This was just another thing that was brought up in the thing. So we're just asking other comments on that before we do. Yeah.
Fran Whalen, I'd agree with Ben on that. Been established, if you're in 490, I think reporting annually is going to be another burden on the farmers. Show whatever tax document that's required. I think if you're once established, and the town will know, the assessor, if you're a farm, they'll know if you're farming. Leave it at that.
Okay, so we'll do, did you have a comment? Sorry.
Well, I took your question the other way around, whether OPM should be releasing assessment data annually versus every 5 years to avoid like drastic transitions.
No, that's
Okay.
yeah, we're looking about, part of one of the recommendations, was looking at an annual eligibility, report for PA 490.
Gotcha. Then I'm going to echo Joe. It's hard to talk about methodology without understanding what valuation. Something that makes sense for one type of valuation does not make sense for another type. So it's hard to answer these questions right now.
Necessarily doesn't have to be on, the methodology. It could be, but I'm just going by recommendations that were submitted. One was talking about, some sort of annual, report. So that's where we want to just conceptually, we've talked about other reporting. It's going to sound like no one's going to be in favor of it, but I will ask the question, for this is, do we create an annual eligibility report for PA 490? Anyone? Yes? I don't know if you have your hand up for yes or if that was from before.
Oh, from before, apologies.
Okay, nope, that's fine. Those no. Okay, it's fine then. Okay.
Martin?
Yes.
Just a quick follow-up to that, along the lines of unintended consequences. One of the things that I can foresee happening, if you have a requirement for annual filing of income or rental information. Sorry.
Okay.
And a farmer files for 6 consecutive years that there's no agricultural operation, that may trigger a declassification by the assessor. So while there's not a requirement to file regularly or annually supporting that you are still operating a farm, if you are making an annual application showing no income or no operation, you could end up losing your classification.
Or anything else on reporting? Obviously, we can, we go through the evaluation section here. We'll get through, some of it. We've got about half an hour left. People signed up for to speak today. A couple of people have signed up to speak. That's there.
Yeah, I have a question.
But for that, Paul, do you have something?
Yeah, I just am thinking, like, our goal, if our concern is the soils, the land, farmland, why are we so concerned about the value of the productivity of that land on a given year. If our goal is to maintain this land as available agricultural land now and in the future, why is it so critical that we can justify or prove that we've gained economic value from that land this year or even for 6 years? If I have 10 or 20 acres of land and I mow it to maintain it, I'm not letting it grow up to brush, but I'm not farming it actively. Does that still qualify for 490 because I'm maintaining the land? It's still agricultural land. It's available for future generations should a future owner choose to utilize it. Or like I'm just confused, like or just thinking, like why would we penalize someone who's maybe not actively farming that land as long as it's not being developed, it's not changing ownership, and it's available for agriculture even if it's not being used at this time?
Damon, sure. So Damon Brush, the first part of the preamble to classifying property was that in order to maintain a ready source of agricultural products to the urban areas, if you're not doing anything, you're not really helping that process. Yes, you are preserving the land from development, but again, you're looking at the purpose of the classification to have an actual agricultural operation. There are questions over how long a property can sit without any use and still receive that kind of a benefit, because other people are looking at that who are paying high taxes and they're saying, well, geez, they have 30 acres. They haven't done a thing in 10 years. Why are they still getting benefits? So there is a higher response that the assessor is placed under pressure to make sure that things are fair and consistent. We can all say it's for preservers. We all agree that preserving is good, but the idea is that that special rate is for your use of the property as farm. Period. Tie that to soil, because in theoretics, productivity is tied to the soil type. You can only or be productive within certain soil types. So again, that's just a barometer. You would find that tied to income streams from the various farming operations. And actually, at this point in time, tobacco is no longer with the highest grossing income. It's horticulture, it's nurseries, it's shrubs. Those are the number one product that is farmed in the state of Connecticut at this point. So, that fertile river valley isn't as important to those type of crops as it was to the shade tobacco. So yeah, there are differences, but there are points and there's ties to the soils. Those are all reasons, and I do think that you have to maintain the use of the property. That's part of the value in exchange.
The properties, as we know, when we were talking about farmland, but there's also open space, the forest land, as we've talked about, so depending upon if it's not being used, possibly it was classified under open space versus, farmland if it's not being used that way. But that's individually, on that.
Just as a follow-up, I wasn't quite there. As far as gathering or reporting information, I'm held up on, looking at income revenues and the application or the exemption that, again, specifies they report acres used and product that they're doing, and that if that is a source of data, or we can add a field or two to make it a prime source of data, is that an option that we should consider, as opposed to having the individuals file a secondary form annually with the assessor or through some other porthole? If they're already filing for the exemption because they are an active farm and they deserve that discount, then we have the data. It's already being filed. Just a matter of compiling it into a usable format. We can even tie it to soil types based on the location of the farm if we get to that detailed of data. I guess my question is that something that we should consider as a source of information or reporting?
can't answer that for you.
I just, I think it's a valid area. I think, like I said before, that it solves the issue. You're gonna get honest numbers, or assumably so. You don't bother the individual. They're already giving you most of the data. All you have to do is put it together in the correct formula and assign it appropriately to the different areas of the state. So I think the data is there. Again, you could go through the process, you can go through the polling, you can ask the survey information, you can force it to be annually and so on and so forth. Those are all options. But I think that there may be a source of data that's already there that wouldn't require any additional effort. If it is, why not utilize it? If it's not, if it requires additional hurdles and burdens, then we may want to sway towards other reporting. I think if the data is there, why not use it? That also would give you rates on forestry. You could also consider things of that nature along national polling, if you will. I do like the idea regarding, the DEEP stumpage value. I don't know that you're going to get a refined stumpage rate for land in Torrington versus Saybrook. Stump is stump. So I think that's based on use. It's based on income derived from harvesting lumber. So I think that's a good approach to use. I don't know what more data you would get from individual forest land owners, because a lot of them don't do anything with their land. They don't harvest it, or they may have an individual come and clear out stuff every once in a while. So I think that would be a good source of data.
Just the note on that with the forest land is, and I know we haven't talked a lot about that, mainly because the forest land, as we know, is done by stumpage reports. We get one out of Massachusetts. They get some information out of New York as well, on that there. And I don't know if Dave, you want to speak anything on that, for it that way there. We haven't, so we're not, although we do have some survey stuff, we've got some, other regional data that gets used along with that and everything, on that. But obviously trying to get more, local data is helpful as well. But anything you want to add, forest land and anything?
David Beers, Connecticut State Forestry Office, and we get our stumpage data from the Southern New England Stumpage Report, and it's luckily being restarted. So we're hoping it'll stick around for at least the next 5 years. So we have a complete set of data 5 years from now. And that covers, you have two numbers, western and eastern, west of the Connecticut River, east of the Connecticut River. There's no river valley number. And that's for Southern New England. So Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. And the region is pretty homogeneous in regards to markets. It's a relatively small area.
Thanks.
Can I just jump in on that? Dave, don't you also use FIA data as part of that analysis? And I'll just mention, east of the Connecticut River can't access the New York log markets like west of the Connecticut River, and that's why my understanding is that's why there's that division, east versus west.
Well, I live in the west, and we grow better timber.
It's true. It is true.
Yeah, no, New York market is definitely a lot of wood out of the western part of the state.
But do you use FIA data as well in terms of standing stock?
We use FIA data to determine statewide growth rates, because it's the growth rates that are used for the with the stumpage value to determine a PA 490 value.
Thanks.
I'll quickly add
that, well, the stumpage rates are by species of tree too, so it is broken down by oak versus maple versus beech or versus different hardwoods. So there is subcategories within that stumpage survey from UMass.
Perfect. Anything else on that piece? Before we start tackle the next one.
Well, can I just quick mention on the forestry just so we can compare it to ag. So if we look at forestry, it's really two categories across the whole state. It's east of the Connecticut River And well, no, sorry, if we look at forestry, it's one price valuation for all the forest in all the states. So it doesn't matter whether you have a hard maple stand, which would be a valuable stand in northwestern Connecticut, or you have scrub oak in eastern Connecticut. And not to say that that's an equal, there's good sites on both sides, but it's one value across the whole state, and it's not related to income. It's not related to that. It's just related to having the forest land there. So if we compare that to ag, it's kind of on the extreme of what we've been talking about with ag. If we were to say one flat rate across the whole state, I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying the comparison there. And no income requirement for forestry. Other states require harvesting for forestry. And again, I'm not trying to throw that in there. I just, as a comparison.
Okay. Then on valuation, and we will obviously not get through this today. So one of the things I want to do is I do want to run through all of the thoughts on this and just kind of I'm going to run through the listing of here. So Nate, can you put the spreadsheet back up for that? And then then we'll kind of discuss, next steps, because one piece could be that we all kind of, then go through and kind of rate these, on it. So we have our next meeting and everything. But let me first just run through the various valuation, concepts that are there. And then we'll kind of talk on some next steps and everything for that.
You want your spreadsheet that was on the agenda?
I've got both.
So I know what you wanted up on the screen.
Yeah, that's fine. We can use that. I'll just see if there's anything else in here. I think you've captured. I did take a quick look at it. So starting with number 8 down here at the bottom, and as I said, I'm just going to go through and read through all of the ones and not get into pieces on it, but update valuation methods to reflect true operating costs and actual agricultural profit. Implement flat statewide valuation rates for farmland by classification. Implement flat tax rate per acre for farmland across the state. Implement flat tax rate per acre per classification for farmland across the state. Implement mill rate caps for farmland. Use 5-year averages, dropping outliers of produce price index, or the PPI, for valuation calculations instead of rental surveys, and adjust the valuations every 5 years. Use rolling 5-year averages of produce price index for valuation calculations instead of rental surveys. Adjust the valuations more often than the 5 years. To the next page. Thank you. Adopt income capitalization of net farm income for valuation. Implement an annual growth cap, suggested like 2.6%. Adopt incentive-based models rewarding production and farm work, credits income types to discourage fallow land on productive soil, and apply size-based tiering for very large land blocks, i.e. 50 acres. So those are some of the concepts on valuation. Let me just double check one thing here. Some of these where we've talked about, implementing the flat rates, everything else. There were some suggestions, of, $1,000 per acre and $50 acre non-productive, $100 per acre or $50 acre non-productive. So there were some different things in there. Changing to an incentive model, move from soil to rewarding actual farm work. I think the others are all kind of covered on there. Yeah. So these are just, as I said, these are kind of the concepts that were, pushed out here, to look at on that data.
I'm sorry, just a quick point. Anything regarding different tax rates or mill rates would be legislative. Right? That's not.
Correct, yes.
So just so that you're aware, anything that we want to do as far as that is concerned would have to require a new law. Otherwise, we're refined to valuation and reporting.
Correct.
Yes.
Then Freund, risk of selling being very boring. Why not stick with what we have? Fix the problem that was presented to us by the two presenters, which was collection of data, which we talked about, and keep the same valuation method. We don't have to worry about unintended consequences. It's basically going to spit out numbers that we're used to that have been supporting ag for the last.
Jenny Kipsikevich, I agree. Wholeheartedly. We did not fix what the law is not broken. How we arrived at the value was.
Other thoughts? I'll add that into the listing of keeping the same, on this, so we'll get an update on this as well. Yeah.
Fran Whalen, that's hard to dispute the way it's been done. But I do lean towards some type of flat rate for each land classification. Something that I would like to have considered down the road.
I'll just add that a couple of these capping the increase between the 5-year periods would not change process, but would provide some stability or a rolling average. Again, would need legislation, but are those things that people are interested in considering, or that kind of by block evaluation, not what we're going to spend some time on at our next meeting?
Keith Bishop, my gut is to have a more stable, long-term process. And while I recognize the points that Ben and others have made here about the valuation of it being an important piece to some degree, keeping it as usable farmland and having that to be a stable going forward, start with valuation that this group feels is fair based upon whatever criteria, number of tiers that we have, and then you apply percentage and a 5-year rolling average, something like that, and it's just locked in. The administrative burden of it is simplified, and we don't have to worry about that part of it until there's some major blow up that you need to have something else reevaluate the whole 490 farmland process. That's all of a sudden farmland is disappearing, no matter how low the taxes are, whether it's solar, whether it's, Amazon warehouse, but we just look at, you talk about good soils, I mean, they're good soils. So what's on those good soils, for the next 20 miles north here, it's not majority farmland anymore. We've lost that, even though we've had 490 for those 60 plus years. So what are we doing to try and make sure that you diminish the version that is permanent? So stability is what I'd be looking at, and this other stuff is minor because tax rate differential, isn't very much, but the burden of the job is significant.
So Keith, just to still that, are you suggesting no data collection and move to a benchmarked with a set PPI or something?
Yeah. Yep. Thank you.
I think that's a little bit different than what's in here, but I think it's fair.
Yeah.
Say it up next.
Yep. John, John Emmanuel.
John.
Sorry.
John.
Sorry. Too many Johns.
I tend to lean towards what Keith was saying too about stability, but I want to make sure that we ask the question again. I tend to be high level on some of these things. Are we going? I think the question should be asked: should we continue with the discussion of surveying and enhancements to that process, or disregard the survey and do a reporting process where we work with the process is established, and we submit it through the local assessor, who then submits it to DOAG. So I think whether we go down the survey process or reporting process, I think that needs to be decided upon.
I think we had John Hall back, sorry.
Yeah, Town Hall, I agree with Keith wholeheartedly. This is our opportunity to determine the value and have this program work for another 60 years, as it has the past 60 years. I would be leaning towards a flat rate. I think it's a slippery slope when you start tying in incomes to it. There's so much diversity in agriculture in Connecticut that I don't think you can find a common thread there. I think it's got to be based on soil types, like I said last month, and we need to set a value statewide and stick with that.
David, I think you were next.
Thank you. Damon Brosh. So I think I just want to point out that every form of valuation is going to be tied to income. Okay. It's the assumption that you're going to be able to gather X amount of income based on the soil type. That you have nice flat land and therefore you should be able to grow X, Y, Z as opposed to the side of a hill. So there is some assumption, but again, that value is going to be based some way, degree, form on income. So we pull income information right now. We want, what are you renting the land to for these agricultural operations? What's the income the person is getting from that land rental? And then you're capitalizing it. So in that degree, it's based on income. It's looking at, again, whatever soil type that you would do, tillable A, tillable B, and the valuation comes from there. I do not think that we want to look at any type of regular increase of rate because, believe it or not, markets fall. And if you're saying it's going to go up 2% every year, what happens when all of a sudden the market crashes out, things drop by 15%? And yet your rate still goes up. So I think you cannot do that. You do have to, there are reasons that they're tied to the value. Okay? Maintain the tie to the value. We have a stable relationship between what everybody else is being assessed at and what the farms are being assessed at. Again, so let's say we revalue, all the residential and commercial property goes up, so does the farm. The rate then comes down and everything balances out. Just trying to make sure that everything is on a consistent and level basis. Okay?
So my heart's with Keith on this. However, having lived under 490 for my total career, it's been very important to have my property taxes adjusted based on the use that I was using for that land. It's only been one tool keeping us in business. Okay, there's been a lot of other things thrown at us from the state level, from the municipal level, from the federal level. And those things have all been important in the soup that comes there. The purposes of this committee, I'm going to stay laser focused on looking at what derailed this, the data collection. I say we fix that, but the rest of it pan out the way that it has for history. I fear that if we try to make this do too many things, it's not going to do what it has done well over the history of the program.
Joe?
Thanks. Yeah, I want to jump in. I mean, I want to point out, I agree with the consistency. We need some level of consistency, and I agree with Damon's point. You know, just a gradual increase is not a way to go. I mean, if we did go to flat rate, we could have a meeting every 5 years where farmers and folks like this get together to discuss a raise or a lowering of the rate. And we could also have a dynamic where the Department of Agriculture, if markets crash and everything crashes, could convene a meeting like this ad hoc to readjust a rate. And I'm sure Department of Agriculture will know when farmers are really hurting per some crazy crash, right? I'm sure they're going to reach out like we did for this. And so I think there are ways to talk about a flat rate and have ways that it can be adjusted with still levels of consistency, even buffers. I also want to point out that the problem with the current year wasn't just data collection. It wasn't just how data were collected. It was also how data were analyzed. And part of that dynamic is because there's not that many, my impression is there's not that many farms renting and leasing land like there were. And a lot of those rental agreements have gone to zero, right? And so a lot of people are leasing farmland at zero price, and those were all excluded from the data analysis process. And so I think there's some really big challenges with using rental values and lease values, because it's very difficult to process those data, especially when you have dynamics where parcels are being rented and part of that parcel is non-forest land. And so for some things like swampland, that, in my opinion, that should just be a flat rate. Make it $1 per acre. I mean, it's been 40, it's been 0 for decades. There's not an income driven part of that. And I don't think income needs to be a driver of valuation of this either. It isn't for forest land. For forest land, it's standing timber value. So anyway, those are the points I wanted to make. Thanks.
Any other comments on that? I'm gonna try to wrap up a little bit and kind of talk about next steps here. But we will add in about keeping things current, as we talked about here onto the list for that there. As we look at this going forward, one thing we'll do is we'll get kind of this updated sheet here with the kind of the ranking of importance. Are members comfortable with kind of doing a ranking, of these, individually and then sending them to us? And then we can compile and kind of have a consensus that way. That seems to be the best way, rather than trying to bring it all to the next meeting and run it through. That way we'd have that to be able to go through. That if we send this out, you rank them, 1 to low, 5 to high in each of the various areas here. We can then, consolidate that, put it into a thing saying this is how many, did this way here and everything else that way. Yeah, we could do it as a form. We can do it.
They use a Cognito or Google form that the department has it.
Yeah, we could set it up through Microsoft, Forms or something else that way. So you don't have, you can want to do it anonymously. That's perfectly fine. Send it in, everything that way. So that way we can, just collect all of that, and have that.
We're gonna switch from
Sure.
yes, no to now ranking on a tiered system. We're gonna change our own strategy, and then I'm just asking.
No, it's up to. I'm just going by what was on the form here.
Yeah, well, we started
on that,
answering questions based on do we want to see it proceed or not see it proceed, and so should we switch our own evaluation method in the middle of it?
Yeah.
Just asking an honest question.
Your choices of what you.
My gut ranking is important because then you do have a range that then shows where feeling is. And if it's on the lower end, it's less important than it is on the upper end, as opposed to I got a choice and I'm in the middle. What do I do?
Very well, I kind of agree with Kim. I said, you voted on these things already. Why are we gonna go back over them? We made decisions today.
Yeah.
Plowed the waters down the road.
Yeah, I'm gonna have the couple, we haven't done the valuation,
Right.
yes, no
Yeah.
type thing, but in that one, it's just debated, do we want to do those as yes, no, or rank them? On it, the report, the land, that piece, we already voted on those. We talked about the reporting already. We've kind of got those out of the way.
Okay.
More so talking about just the valuation piece. Do we want to do those as a ranking or do those as a yes, no?
Yeah, just John Emanuel, just a quick question. Are some of the recommendations that were submitted the past couple of days, would those be added to this eventually, or?
Yeah, the only ones that are not there is one you guys said this morning, just because there was absolutely, when I got up for it and saw that, it's like, okay, well, I can't add that now. So those don't, John and Fran put together a presentation. I will get it out to everybody, of some other things, and I will add those into this list as well as pop the presentation out to everybody so that way they have that. And that's why I said, unfortunately, we won't be able to get to the whole thing today, but we'll make sure those get added into, this listing as well and get this, piece out to everybody after the meeting as well. So yes. As far as nothing else has come in. So I guess, these, are we fine with doing the valuation as a ranking just to see where everything is at?
Yes.
Okay.
Can we add current evaluation method?
Yes, I'm going to add that one on there. Correct. I will add that on as well as the few that came in under
the other proposal here. Yes, I have that down. Public comments, the people that signed up to register to speak are not online. But I do want to go through kind of, Commissioner and I talked about our next meetings. So our next scheduled meeting would be June 2nd. Now, just due to some, logisticals and conflicting stuff, we are looking at changing the time to either do 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. This would be a virtual meeting, I'm sorry. On June 2nd would be a virtual meeting. And we're looking at either doing 11 to 1 or from 1 to 3 based on consensus from everyone. Just apologies, we can't do it first thing in the morning as we normally do. So if people have a chance to check their schedules or be able to look at their schedule to see if they could do 11 to 1 or 1 to 3 to see which might be a better time. And as I said, this one would be a virtual meeting on June 2nd. You're up.
23.
I prefer later in the afternoon.
In the afternoon, 1 to 3. That work for the majority of people? Okay. Wrong button on my thing. Okay, so we will look, June 2nd from 1 to 3 will be a virtual meeting. We'll set up on Zoom so you guys don't have to deal with Teams. And then, so you can put in your schedule June 23rd, 9:30 in person here again. Our kind of goal is at the next meeting to kind of finish up, looking at preliminary recommendations and then start working on it. The June 23rd is kind of where we're at with this, see how much we get through at the June 2nd meeting. June 23rd, we'll be trying to compile, and elaborate, further on those recommendations. If we're able to get it all done and have it together, we would look July 14th to have a public presentation. That's if we're done, on June 23rd, having, a preliminary, draft of, recommendations done, which would be, we're looking at that being a virtual public presentation. So that's kind of our timeline looking at, but obviously if we need more time, we'll push out the public, presentation, a little bit further. But that's where we're looking at for the next 3 meetings on that. So June 2nd at 1, June 23rd at 9:30, July 14th would be a virtual, no time yet set, but if the public presentation, and if we're not ready yet, it'll be a 9:30 meeting. Any questions on any of that? Everyone's got it in their calendars. Okay. I think that is everything, unless anyone else has something else they need to bring up. We will adjourn at 11:28 and thank everyone, and we will get you out this listing here with these updated things, and appreciate the feedback coming back in. Thank you all very much.
Thanks.